From the lowest to the highest, from the furthest to the nearest, from the smallest of the smallest to the greatest of the greatest, yoga is about all of life, everything we do, all of existence. My name's James Bogue. Welcome to the Whole Life Yoga Podcast.
All right, so James, it's so nice to have you here.
Nice to see you, Nadine. Yeah, good morning.
Thank you. And yeah, I'm so curious to hear your experience and your view about not only yogic philosophy, but also the whole theme of like stories and how stories can teach us and affect us very deeply. And I'm so excited about it because I kind of come from the same uh, standpoint or viewpoint that the oral transmission of wisdom and philosophy is so important in yoga. It's not only about the physical practice or the appearance of what you're doing or how you're breathing, but really the alivefulness of like an exchange in a group with someone leading a gathering circle or a class and so on. So can you tell me a little bit about like how did you discover for yourself like that mythology actually is great and that stories have a deep impact?
Well, that's a great question, Nadine, and I think it would be there are many places where it could perhaps be pinpointed. Um, when I first started really getting into yoga, I was very fortunate to study with a man called Larry Small, who was a direct student of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and later Swami Laxmanju. So two great teachers
Mm.
of the 20th century. And Swami Laxmanju, an extraordinary saint, God realized master. And Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, when Larry was studying with him, was teaching prolifically these long courses on Vedic sciences. So Larry really got to experience the Indian tradition from the inside, if you like, and really be exposed to the traditional teaching methods, which so often included story. And when I studied with Larry, the first year, the first 8 months, there was a more or less weekly satsang. It was a Sunday evening. This was in Bangkok, and I was teaching at the university there at the time and also studying at the yoga studio called Yoga Element Studio. And I'd met Larry. There was this trip from the studio out to a lovely green place. And the first evening I heard Larry speak, my jaw was in my lap. It was like, wow, this feels like home. And then over the subsequent months, Larry gave this extraordinary, at least for me, wonderfully inspiring, and it was just magical series of satsang talks. Because what would happen would be on a Sunday evening, Larry would give the talk on perhaps some theme in the yoga tradition. There would almost always be an amazing story. And then what I would experience was that the rest of the week, the teachings would then just be jumping out at me. I was going to work on the bus on Monday morning and I get off the bus, there's the teaching. So there was this resonant quality.
Mhm.
But I already had how to say, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of love for story and literature, and also unpacking stories and considering stories. So I'd enjoyed
Mm.
studying languages and literature, especially during school and university. I studied languages and literature at university. But going back to when I was at school, for me, the literature I most enjoyed was what I considered literature that was teaching me about life, that was, well, in the words of Shakespeare, holding the mirror up to nature so we can actually understand
Mm.
more our own
Yeah.
reality. And so that quote's from Hamlet, and I had the chance to study this amazing play, Hamlet, for a whole year when I was at school. And I just found it amazing. It was like dripping with truth because it was speaking about these perennial realities of human existence.
Yeah.
As a younger child, I'd also really enjoyed any mythology I'd really been exposed to. And age 4, 5, 6, um, the Star Wars myth in its original form. And I was born in 1977 when the first Star Wars film came out. And when I was small, I remember going to see The Empire Strikes Back, the second film of the original trilogy, episodes four, five, and six, I think, in the Star Wars series, as they are
Yeah,
called. Um, but when I then reflected on that in later years, I consider that the Star Wars myth, or certainly the original three, they are a kind of what's known in Sanskrit as a Purana. They are mythological story that's archetypal, and it's set a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. It's set once upon a time.
right.
So in folk tales and these great stories from every continent, when are they set? Where are they set? They're basically set in the ever new now. Once upon a time, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. It means it's not set just in a particular time. And in the Indic tradition, we have so many beautiful examples of this. And the words, for example, for the Ramayana or the Mahabharata, these great, sometimes referred to as epic stories or histories, that
Right.
include so many stories, they're called itihasa. And itihasa means so it happened, but it also means so it happens. They're telling us the
Beautiful.
story of life. And so as you suggested, Nadine, for me, when we sit with these stories in a live gathering, this is the tradition. It's to
Mm,
study is not to study it in some academic dry way as an artifact that's of interest. No, it's to study it in relation to our own lives. And
yeah,
one of the most, to me, amazing and most beautiful things about these stories is they can guide us, inspire us in fresh, unique ways each time we come to them. And whenever we gather in a group, the story will come through in its own particular way, relevant to whoever's gathered. Um, I don't know if I answered the question, but
yes, you did, definitely. And there was so much in it to understand that actually stories are not just like some fairy tales and
mm,
floating around, but it's actually really real and here, and it can help us navigate through life basically if we just
definitely.
listen. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do feel as well that in the current situation in the world, we're living inside of so many stories. There are so many stories that often people take for granted, but we haven't actually really stopped to slow down and realize, oh, I've believed this particular story of
Right.
how things need to be, or how things should be, or how I could be, or can be, or can't be. We have got attached to so many different stories. And one of the
Exactly.
wonderful things about the mythology, the yoga stories, the spiritual literature, and spiritual stories from all around the world, as I understand it and see it, these stories invite us to actually apprehend and recognize more clearly when we're in the grip of these false stories and how we
Right.
can change the direction or the narrative of our own life through our own steady, sincere efforts. And one thing that's very beautiful in the stories, if somebody tells me in a didactic way, oh, you must do this or you shouldn't do that, I'm not likely to digest and assimilate that instruction very well.
I can relate.
Could even be inclined to just do the opposite.
Hmm.
However, if I'm given a story, and if I'm given a story as rich in nuance and flavor as the yogic mythological stories, it's highly likely that I'll be able to see my own foibles, my own fallings, my own stumblings,
Right.
and also some of my own deeper capacities within the
Yes.
frame of the story. And so the story is this invitation. It's not prohibiting, it's not saying no, it's extending this encouragement and this invitation to perhaps explore how I could navigate my life slightly differently or radically differently.
Beautiful. And also, if I may add, actually the interesting thing, what I experience always with stories is that in the group, everyone gets what they need to hear, although it's
Mhm.
one story. And even it can be just yeah, the intake can be also so different from like two different people. So that's amazing as well.
Definitely. And I think when we gather and we witness and experience that, to me, this is also very pragmatic because it helps us recognize that I think one of the things that human beings sometimes we struggle with is we expect others to see things the way we do.
Yes.
We expect, and really to see this extraordinary um, particularity, this uniqueness, and
Mm,
and the way that these stories speak to us over time. I find it striking. Sometimes I heard one, he's quite a famous atheist, say, "Oh, all these religious literature, if it was destroyed, it would never come back because it's just been invented. It would just come back in a different form. Because whereas the science would always come back because it's true."
right.
And I thought I'm not so sure about that statement because, in the history of science, one generation's certainty is often the next generation's sometimes laughing stock, but also, things
Yeah.
change, new
Yeah.
insights, and who knows in what order different things would have been discovered depending on the circumstances and what particular technologies or discoveries happened first. But when we look at the spiritual literature from all around the world, what we find again and again are certain archetypal motifs, certain realities of what it means to live as a human being.
Mm, interesting. Yeah.
And the particular flavors, the particular settings can be quite different, but we can find stories from many different traditions that have so much in common.
Right.
And I also find that sometimes when one is exposed to stories that are a little bit different from those which one grew up with, or that are from a
Hmm.
different culture, and yet still have this very familiar archetypal resonance, the invitation can sometimes actually be easier to accept
I see. Oh,
because
yeah.
the slightly exotic quality demands or invites a more open way of relating
Mm,
to it.
mm,
When there is something a little bit strange, it makes us more alert
right.
and, in my experience, more receptive to the universal, timeless truths that the story is a vehicle for.
Yes.
Yeah.
I see. And I mean, that's why we also, because it's such a powerful thing and at the same time a beautiful thing to gather, to talk about stories, listen to a story, work with it, from different standpoints. And as you said, it can like help you to separate from what you maybe are familiar with and see from a different point of view. So that's why we have agreed to meet in Prague in autumn and actually offer like a specific workshop series where stories and the recitation of Sanskrit is like the main part of the whole, let's say, transformation process, which can happen if one opens up to that. And can you talk a little bit about that? What are we expecting to have there?
Yeah, thank you, Nadine. So I'm very pleased to be sharing this at Ikigai, this wonderful center in Prague. And what we're going to be doing is traditional yoga practice and study in the form of engaging with time-proven teachings from the yoga tradition
Mm,
through the vehicle of story and mythology. So what this series will involve, when we gather, we're going to have a 4 hour we'll have the whole afternoon to explore together. And so there'll be a sound element. We will do some Sanskrit recitation. It'll be very accessible. In the initial series, we'll be working with the archetype, symbol, figure of Ganesha, this amazing symbol of yoga. So we
right.
will learn a beautiful but relatively short and accessible hymn to Ganesha, and we'll sing this. And this is very much part of the traditional way of studying. First, we
Hmm.
invoke the energy, we attune to the energy, and we create a participative learning environment. One of my late great teachers used to say, he said, the guru needs the shishyan, and I'm not a guru at all,
Mm-hmm.
but the idea is that when we're studying together, it's this togetherness that brings it
Right.
alive. The teacher needs the students. And when I first began teaching, when I was a teenager, I started coaching basketball to younger students at my school. And what I experienced, I didn't think of it in yogic terms at that time, but really basketball was this object of support. In a yogic sense, this is yogic meditation. We give all the powers of our awareness something to gather around,
Mm-hmm.
and that allows us to learn, allows us to see things we didn't see before. So when I was coaching basketball, basketball was the thing, the support that allowed us to come together and learn together, expand
Mm-hmm.
and grow together. And when we're studying a story, so when we did a basketball session, at the beginning, we'll kind of warm up. We'll bounce the ball, we'll pass the ball, we'll move, we'll start to enter the domain of
Right.
the basketball as a means to teach us. So maybe I'm stretching the analogy a little bit, but when we gather to explore a story, and first of all, we sing. This is an interesting thing, that in traditional ways of engaging with story, almost always there is some ritual marker. There is a way to invite the participants to
Yeah.
step to some degree out of the ordinary way of flowing through the day into a way of being that is a little bit more intentionally oriented towards the mystery, towards the
Mm.
realm of instruction that comes from intelligences that we are part of, but that we can sometimes forget.
Oh, yeah.
So when we start to recite together, something magical happens. This is
Mm-hmm.
one of the reasons why I love kirtan. When we sing together, we create a resonance, we create a togetherness, and we start to generate something together. When we do this as we are orienting towards a story and an archetype, this is just helping create a container in which the story can come even more alive.
Mm. Yeah, beautiful.
And then there will be the live storytelling. So in these sessions, I will share stories of Ganesha and they'll be told live. So some of these stories, I have shared them many times over the last 20 years, and they always come through slightly differently. As you suggested, Nadine, it really depends who is in the room.
Right.
So just the other week, I was sharing a beautiful story from the Upanishads, and it was also in Prague with my colleague Teresa. And in the room that day, there were quite a few people who were relatively new to the
Mm.
meditation technique that she teaches. And this wasn't planned, and I didn't know that. But the way the story came through was very appropriate for people who were in that situation. Somehow, a
Amazing.
lot more emphasis on the way the story represents the principles that can help guide us when we're working with a technique, when we're establishing a practice. That just got much more emphasized than in the time I told it previously.
Amazing.
But this is how it is. When we come together and open ourselves up
Mm-hmm.
to the wisdom, the practical intelligence that is encoded in these stories, in these teachings. And I think in the modern world, sometimes in our education systems, we don't experience this living
Exactly.
story. We don't experience this way of learning that's actually time proven. One of the same great Indian teacher who's now passed on, he said to me, you don't have an education because you went to school in England. So you had an exam. You knew when the exam would be. You knew the date, the time. You could look at last year's question papers. That's not a real exam. He says a real exam, it will be sprung upon you when you don't expect it.
Oh,
And
wow.
you
This is
don't
so
know what
true.
form it will take. The real teacher will test you, and then you'll find out if you've assimilated the material and you have it within you so you can actually apply it. But he also said,
Wow.
education doesn't mean to cram in. The
Yes.
purpose of education is to draw forth the beautiful gifts that already reside within. Yoga
Mm,
doesn't ask us to become anything we are not. And the whole purpose or the point of yogic practices is not to develop into something that we are not, but rather to reclaim or regain access to the subtler and more integrated reality that is who we really are.
mm,
So we can actually reclaim access to this deeper intuitive wisdom. And these traditional stories, one way we can understand it is, where do they come from? They are the expression of that wisdom in a
right.
form that we can relate to.
Mm,
And it's not a mechanical, formulaic representation, but it does have a structure. It does have various archetypal elements that we can then engage with.
right.
And there is a wrestling with the teachings. There is an interrogation of the teachings that they're intended to do that.
Mm,
It's also likely that this autumn I'm going to be working with another of my favorite texts, which is the Ramayana. Now, the Ramayana, amazing story, and it contains many stories, but there are certain places in the text where it really invites, what, what's going on here? This is a surprise.
like the tension is building, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
also sometimes things happen that are not quite what we might expect.
Yeah.
And so the yoga is far too wise to be rule bound or to be
Beautiful.
prescriptive.
Right.
Because, for example, the Bhagavad Gita, one of the most treasured teachings in part of the Mahabharata, great epic story, this, this teaching begins when the student, who is Arjuna in that situation, when he finds himself in a situation where basically the rules he's relied on up to that point in his life, they're no longer adequate for the situation he finds himself in.
Oh, wow. That's
And
like that happens every day, right? For
exactly,
us as well. It's still the
yeah,
same.
yeah. So the yoga practitioner, and this is something that we'll explore in the stories of Ganesha, needs to learn, and I don't just mean learn intellectually, needs to install deep into the fiber of our
Mm,
being the reality that any rule worth respecting will bear being broken for the sake of the principle that it's designed to enshrine.
mm.
So yoga doesn't deal in easy answers. It is an ongoing inquiry,
Right.
but the stories and the teachings are encoded in so many ways. We have the ultra distilled Yoga Sutra, we have the dialogue of
Right.
the Bhagavad Gita, we have the wide ranging teachings of the Upanishads, and we have these stories, so
Right.
many of them. But what these teachings do is they give us a structure and a field of resources
Mm,
that we
right.
can then work with to help us navigate the inevitable challenges of life with a lot of support. Because
Mm,
the way I experience it is, when these teachings, these stories become more and more familiar, when we find ourselves in a particular type of challenge, that teaching from the sutra, that passage
beautiful.
from the Gita, that section from that story, and the way that character responds, uh, flashes forth and offers practical support.
Right.
So it's a way, when we engage with these teachings, it's a way to start cultivating an internal council of elders or advisors
Yes.
and practical resources that, when we feel torn, split, unsure, overwhelmed, we have resources to help us.
Beautiful. I mean, I could go on and on about all these stories because it's just gives me goosebumps to hear the power of the potential power it just carries. And it's to me it sounds very healing as well. Like
Mm.
that you through just engaging, and that's I guess what this time we're living in maybe sometimes is missing because we are I'm like in a digital age. I mean, it's beautiful. We can connect like this and
Sure,
talk, but it's not the same. Like we would be in the same room and talk. It would be still like a different energy. And when more people really gather and engage and be intimate with the situation they're in and not, yeah, thinking about what to cook for dinner or how to
sure.
manage their work, but they are in it in this, as you said, in this container we are creating. That's yeah, that's the yoga, that's the relating which happens, and it's so freeing as well, as you say, like to remember and reconnect all these different layers and parts of us where which are oftentimes rather in conflict. So it sounds really so powerful, and then two questions came up while listening. And one was because you mentioned the element of Sanskrit recitation that we will basically, let's say, create that container or uh, offer up something so we can enter this space of the story and like this energy we want to work with. Do you like, can you maybe explain a little bit what in your experience why Sanskrit is so powerful? I mean, it's a super old language and of course it has its power in itself, but wouldn't it be enough if, just like a provocative question from me, wouldn't it be enough to, let's say, chant or recite the translation of or the meaning of that Sanskrit text in order to enter that space? Like, yeah, can you say
This
something
is
to that?
this is a big topic, Nadine. I will attempt to offer a. I would. There's a couple of things that when you were sharing, I'd like to kind of comment. So please
Yes,
pull me back to that. But I'll take on this vast topic of why recite in Sanskrit. And I'll try to be brief.
thank
So
you.
the one of the main reasons why the recitation or the reading of a translation of what a Sanskrit hymn or mantra means is nowhere near the same is because the Sanskrit language, Sanskrit means well made, well done, well structured. And it's a very, very prominent feature of this language that words pack in and encode many, many layers of meaning simultaneously. So
Yeah, I
within a
see.
Sanskrit verse, it can be read at multiple levels
Mhm.
simultaneously, and they're all correct, they're all accurate. So somebody
Fascinating.
could offer an accurate translation of a verse, of a hymn, or a section of a text, and it's not wrong, but it's only the tip of the iceberg. It's only one sliver of the vastness that is encoded within that verse. So, as you suggested before, Nadine, when we come into a circle and we listen to a story, everybody's going to take different things from it. It's going to resonate with different listeners in different ways. When we work with the Sanskrit language, first of all, it's energetic, it's frequency. So, when we make the vibrations associated with Ganesha, for example, then all the words, all these uh, ways of condensing meaning and information and suggestion, we are opening ourselves to that.
Mm,
Whereas if we just read a translation, so for example, many people might have heard, if they go to yoga classes, might have heard the mantra, Loka samastaha sukhino bhavantu.
yeah.
Now, bhavantu is from the verb root bhu, which is the verb to be or to become.
Hmm.
Now, we could talk for the next hour about that verb and the significance of bhavantu, but it means to be or to become. Sukhinaha, this is from sukham means good space. It means
Hmm. Yes.
agreeable, harmonious, well. Samastar means evenly, thoroughly throughout. And loka means that which can be looked upon, that which is
Hmm.
manifest. So, an accurate translation could be, may all in manifest existence be happy and well and harmonious. That is accurate. Some
Right.
people say, may all beings be happy and free. May all the beings in all the worlds be happy and free. There's nothing wrong with those translations. The
Yes.
only thing is, they're giving a thousandth
Oh,
of
yeah.
what the mantra is invoking.
Hmm.
Because each word has so many layers of rich suggestion encoded and packed within it. So in that example, the verb bhu, bhu is also a word for the earth. It's that which
Right.
has become and which is becoming. So
It's
when we
complex.
yeah, and loka, like it's that which this is talking, it's about all the ancestors and all those that will come. And now, in the course of our own life, can we navigate it harmoniously in a way that fosters this evolution into greater harmony, greater beauty, greater cohesion? All of that's being encoded, and
Wow.
so much more. And then sukhinaha, because it means easeful, agreeable, harmonious. But come in Sanskrita, it's a word for space. And space in Sanskrit is not empty, but is filled with vibration.
Hmm.
So it's if we just say may all be well, well, that's not the same as Sukhinaha because
I
Sukhina has
see.
so many layers of meaning.
Right. Right.
So when we start to recite in Sanskrita, what we're doing is we are opening up. It's like we are tuning our antennae
Oh, yeah.
to be better able to understand the mantra. Because to
Yes.
understand the mantra does not mean to give an academically passable translation. It means to become the living, breathing vehicle of the mantra.
Mm.
And one does not actuate that by coming to an intellectual understanding of it. It has to be a
Yeah.
whole system understanding. So, in traditional Sanskrit education, before one goes into the analysis of how the words work together, one recites the words.
Mm.
One opens oneself up to its vibratory power. So, that's my attempt at a short answer on the.
And that already like it's again just I don't know, not even 1% of how deep this can be. And already it's just like this understanding, wow, it is really deep and it can bring up
Yeah.
so much energy and so on. It's
And
it's it's fantastic.
I think there's also one other thing that's worth, there's so many things that are worth mentioning, but one thing that is coming now
Yeah.
is also when we recite, sometimes when I'm doing kirtan or people want to know, what does it mean? What does it mean?
Right.
And if when we come to these sessions, then we'll start to understand a little bit more of what it means. It means so much.
Hmm.
But I'm of the persuasion that it's very helpful to actually explore things we don't really know. This is a means
Yeah.
to engage with the mystery.
The mystery.
Now, when I recite a language which I can start to understand much of what it's signifying, the main energetic thrusts of where it's directed. But yoga practice is all about going beyond the known. So when I
Hmm.
encounter the yogic terminology, and it's not saying may all be happy and free, it's much more nuanced than that.
Right.
It's inviting me to expand my perspective. And this is just
Right.
so utterly foundational to the yogic method. It's not that I want
Yeah.
to understand it so I can put it in the boxes of how I see life. No, the whole point of the teaching is to dissolve the edges of those confining boxes so we can move
Mm.
more coherently and harmoniously towards greater health, greater wholeness.
Mm. And this now, what you have been saying can be related to something else you have been saying at the beginning of the conversation that in your opinion, listening to stories which are maybe not from our culture, where we are not used to, that it opens up even more because it is the unknown, it is the mystery and so on. And this leads me to another rather provocative question. Like why are we listening or why are we, I mean, it's about yoga, all right, but then these stories and you like talking about archetypes and the same the cultures have similar archetypes. Isn't it a little bit, I don't know the right word, but don't I have to be Hindu or isn't it religious, working with these kind of things when me personally, I'm from a European country and I didn't grow up with that. Can you talk about that a bit?
Another huge question.
Yeah, it's the day of huge questions.
And again, I will try to. So the way there's many layers of how I understand this. One is that the Indic tradition, as it's come to me, and as I understand it, it is not for any particular person. In the Kashmiri Shaiva tradition, which is where that's the lineage that has, let's say, is foundational in my approach to things.
Hmm.
So Swami Laxmanju was my teacher's teacher. Abhinavagupta, the great master of the medieval
Yeah.
period, he says, we pay caste the merit it deserves by paying it no attention at all. There's
Mm.
the prerequisite, the qualification is the desire. If one has the desire to explore these teachings, then one is qualified.
Beautiful.
And at the same time, one wants to do so with this desire, with reverence, with deep interest.
Right.
And there's also the idea that in the course of human existence, right now, the Indic tradition has potentially a very important role to play. Because sometimes I half jokingly say the Indian stories are the best, the Indic mythology is the best. No, I don't. When I say that, there is something that I've encountered in the Sanskrit encoded stories that's a little bit different from many of the myths that I've encountered in other
It
traditions.
is. I agree.
And one of the things that's different is the thoroughness and the flavor.
Mm.
So, one thing is these stories have been told for millennia, and we have access to them in a relatively coherent state. So,
Mhm.
some famous holy books, for example, often get read in edits of translations of edits of translations of edits of translations. If I read the Bhagavad Gita or the Yoga Sutra, I'm reading the original text, if I'm reading it in Sanskrit, for example.
Right.
Certainly, more or less. And the other thing, for example, in Ramayana, the Ramayana is split into different, what they call khandas, different big books. And the perhaps all-time favorite is the Sundara Kanda, which begins with Hanuman, this great heroic yogin and dedicated servant devotee of Rama. He does this extraordinary feat of crossing the ocean from
Hmm.
India to Lanka. And the episode of that crossing is itself an extraordinary story, laden with so much rich archetypal
Yeah.
teachings, one of my favorite stories. But after Hanuman performs this amazing feat, which the celestial onlookers, they're in awe of the resourcefulness, the ingenuity, the resilience that he's demonstrated during this crossing. Not that long after, we see Hanuman in the pits of depression and despair because he hasn't been able
True.
to find Sita. And so we
Right.
see him contemplating suicide in the midst of his great exploits. So it's not, we don't see a one-dimensional or two-dimensional
Yeah,
black white binary oversimplified representation of reality.
I
It's
understand. Yeah.
always full of nuance. And some people say, Ramayana is much more, or these are the good guys, these are the bad guys, than some of the other Indic mythology. But even in Ramayana, one can see there's so much nuance and this invitation to interrogate the teachings, to contemplate them, to wrestle with them,
Mm-hmm.
to explore
Mm-hmm.
them. Again, it doesn't give us the answer. It gives us a frame for ongoing skillful inquiry.
Right.
And the Indic stories are so full of flavor, but they were not made only for the particular locale. These are
Mm-hmm.
teachings that are of resonant value for our species
Mm-hmm.
and for the challenge that we face now as a species.
Right.
So I'm uh, last year when I was at a conference in Mysore, one of the it was a fantastic presentation speech from my perspective, but the speaker was emphasizing this that the Indic tradition has many distinctive features and it offers a lot for humanity. And one of the things that it also offers is one doesn't have to believe anything. One doesn't have to, join
Yeah.
any cult or any faith or, sign up for anything. No, these stories are invitations.
Mm-hmm.
One can engage with the story with one's own discernment in one's own authentic way, contemplate them, relate them to our own situation, and
Yeah.
then decide for ourselves how useful, how pragmatic they are.
Amazing.
But I find them extraordinarily useful, extraordinarily pragmatic, and so full of um, encouragement
Hmm.
and empowering invitation.
Amazing. And that makes so much sense. Like to, again, not put it in a box. Like this
Mm.
is an Indic tradition, and that's why if I'm not born there or I cannot relate to it, it's not for me. You said the beautiful thing, like if it calls on you and you're
Yeah.
interested in a sincere way, that's all. That's all it needs, right?
Yeah,
And
no, and another thing that my
yeah,
teacher said, and this is in line with the Abhinavagupta lineage, he said, all the great masters from all the great traditions, they're all playing on the same team.
exactly.
And they all share the same aim, which is the upliftment of all of humanity.
Right.
And
Amazing.
these teachings, these stories, they're inviting us to fathom more of our real depths and to bring forth
Mm.
more of our real gifts. So I'm uh, very suspicious of voices that would deny the beauty of different cultures.
Yeah.
And this is the reality of the world now. My
Right.
teacher also said, the yogis have been after Kali Yuga for some time. The great master, so many great teachers. It started in the 19th
Mm.
century with some of these well-known teachers. Swami Vivekananda, emissary of Paramahansa
Mm.
Ramakrishna, went to this World Congress of Religions and brought
Right.
the house down with his extraordinary presentation of the Indic tradition. Paramahansa Yogananda went to the US and
Yeah.
presented teachings of the Indic tradition in such a way that people from a different cultural background could find, so much resonance.
Mm.
I mentioned Maharishi Mahesh Yogi teaching Vedic meditation or authentic Indic meditation techniques in a way that was accessible for people. And
Yeah.
many others have done, like Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, have continued in this vein. There are so many, there is this, and in the stories, we see this archetypal representation of the ongoing tension and struggle between those forces
Right.
of greater illumination and
Hmm.
those forces of greater occlusion.
Right.
You can call it the light and the dark, but it's not just black and white. It's much more nuanced than that. But
Yes.
nonetheless, in the stories, in the Puranic setup, also in Ramayana and in Mahabharata, we can see this struggle. And in the Indic perspective, the problem, if you like, is avidya, which means not
Yes.
seeing the full picture. It means partiality. And so the teachings are designed, intended to help us recognize our own partiality
Mm.
and expand our perspective so we can see more steadily and more clearly. And
Beautiful.
the archetypal stories, they're tremendous vehicles to help do that. So I'm
Definitely.
really looking forward to the opportunity to dive deep into them. And one thing that we'll do, so I mentioned, there'll be the recitation element.
Yes.
We'll have the live storytelling, but then we'll contemplate the stories. We'll discuss, well, why is this happening? That's a bit strange. What's going on here? And then also in these sessions, so people who attend, they'll be given written notes. So you'll have like a
Hmm.
version of the story and then also some reflections on the story, and then invitations for ongoing inquiry. So
So
we
it's
can then
like a
use,
process which just
exactly.
continues to like boil down to the essential thing the person really needs to
Yeah.
get. So yeah,
The way I sometimes refer to it is like, the Yoga Sutra, the Bhagavad Gita, it's not a book that you read it once and you give it away. Same with these stories.
right.
Like the best stories, you want to come back to them.
Yeah.
Again, I heard a rather famous person saying he never watches a film twice because I know what happens. So, well, if it's a good film, it's worth watching more than once because
Exactly.
each time if it's a really good film, it will be speaking, at least this is my opinion, at this archetypal level, and it will reveal
Mm.
more and more things each time. If it's a great piece of drama, a
Mm.
great piece of art, a great story.
I agree.
And so the stories of Ganesha, the stories of Ramayana, the stories of the Indian tradition, there's so much to them. And as we engage with them, as we apprentice ourselves to them, they start to give more, they start to reveal more and more to us.
Right.
So this process is very much part of traditional practice and study. It's a strange thing that I've noticed. Sometimes I've met people who they do a yogasana style where they repeat the same thing day after day after day, and then they say, why does Krishna keep saying the same thing in the Gita? Or why does this story say the same thing as that story? It's like, well, have you got it yet? Have you become fully established in it? And this to
Yeah.
me is one of the practical beauties of the tradition.
Mm.
The stories reiterate these underlying principles
Yes.
in so many slightly different ways. And that helps us humans, by and by, install that understanding or bring that understanding more to the fore in our own way of being.
Amazing. So if I can ask, now, let's say either like two scenarios. Either I'm a yoga practitioner, I do mostly asana practice, I'm into yoga. So most likely this will be very interesting to me because it gives me like the chance to enter deeper and to understand more and more actually the roots and the go not the goal, like there's a big goal, but like where does this yoga practice lead to? But also, it sounds to me that this is so open and so accessible for everyone, even if you have no clue about yoga or you don't want to practice any physical or any meditation practice. Can you speak for whom is this workshop series meant, or who will be happy here?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question, Nadine. I think who will be happy is if you like story and mythology and you like literature, you like unpacking stories and
Aha.
contemplating stories, you'll definitely enjoy this. If you like to kind of look beneath the surface of things and you're looking to understand, get more of a map, a structure, a compass for your own life, one thing that many people, I was born in the 1970s, and some of my friends who are similar generation to me have said, that they feel this lack of spiritual mooring or orientation in
Mm.
life,
Yeah.
and recognize that, oh, these types of stories, they can help us connect to something that is just part of our heritage. We might be a little
Right.
bit estranged from it, but it's part of who we are as human beings. We do have this rich legacy of spiritual teaching, literature, and story. So if you want a little bit of guidance, so like a more of a support structure in your life, you'd like
Right.
to have a team of wise inner counselors that you can consult. Apprenticing ourselves to this wisdom tradition can help us
Mm.
instantiate that within ourselves. I think also if you do practice yogasana, then engaging with these stories can really expand that practice.
Yeah.
As you suggest, it can help us flesh out or expand our understanding of what I'm actually doing when I'm working with these techniques
Right. Right.
and understand more of the real potential of these techniques, their roots, and also, a yogasana. I mentioned when we were speaking about lokasamasta sukhino bhavantu. So one of the definitions of yogasana is sthira sukham asanam.
Right.
But asana is a space, sukham, it's a space of sustainable good vibrations. Steady, it's easy, but more literally, it's a space of sustainable good vibrations. And so the asana itself is a microcosm for the integration and the embodiment of the principles, these dynamic
Yeah.
principles that are encoded in the stories. So if I'm going to live my life from this seat of dynamic equilibrium, I'm going to be asked to demonstrate my capacity to
Mm.
maintain this sustainable good vibration orientation to life in the face of challenge and loss and having to face things that I would never have perhaps anticipated. So the stories, they're also encoding the path of yoga practice.
Hmm.
So if one, oh, I'm practicing yoga, are you? What does that
Exactly.
mean? And so the path of practice is mapped out in
Hmm.
Ramayana, for example. Ramayana, it means the adventure or the quest or the going of Rama. From where? From a state of not being established in the fullness of who he really is to being established on the throne of enlightenment, on the asana of enlightenment. So it's the whole
Hmm.
story. You can read it in many ways, but one way is it's mapping out so many of the practical things that can help us access more steadiness, more wholeness in our own day-to-day life.
Mm.
When we work with Ganesha, Ganesha means wholeness. Gana means group, it also means member of a group. Isha, the one that can unify the group. So
Mm.
these stories of Ganesha, when we're doing yogasana, one of the things that we're aiming to do is to harmonize all our powers so they can function in this mutually supportive, nourishing way together.
Right.
And so that will be mapped out, that will be described and suggested in very relatable ways in the stories of Ganesha. But even if one doesn't practice asana, what are we generally looking for in life as human beings? At least more cohesion, more wholeness, more richness, more
Right.
fulfillment. That's what these stories are about. So if you want more fulfillment in your life, you want more satisfaction, I think I think you'll be satisfied if you join this course.
Definitely. It will give you at least the tools so that you can
Definitely.
shape it that way. That's
Mm.
great. And like hearing all of this, and I'm already contemplating everything what you're saying because it's again, it's so deep, right? It's so much, and we could in every topic we could jump in even more and in more an extended way. It's actually already showing the whole how do you say flavor of this workshop series that again it's layers and layers and everyone can find something there for themselves wherever they are at and it will always meet them and I think this explains and beautifully also describes like the power of stories, the power of like connecting with people, sharing some time and space and energy and thoughts, and through that expanding and yeah, opening ourselves up and not being in these like little boxes we like to use so much as human beings. So all of that sounds amazing. And um, is there anything would you would like still to add or say or explain to this whole like say entry into this world of stories or Ganesha and or yoga?
Yeah, I think two things is um, you mentioned flavor,
Yes,
and this is a very important principle in the Sanskrit tradition of arts and stories and
right.
poetry and performance, all of these things. And also in Ayurveda, there's the idea if we eat a meal that is well flavored, it brings satisfaction. We don't need to eat too much. We feel very satisfied. Similarly, when we engage these stories, they contain many flavors. These flavors that are just part and parcel of the human experience. We can relate to them. And because of that, they help us engage, they pull us into the moment more fully,
Mm,
where the practical teachings can meet us more powerfully. And the other thing is we're going to be working with story in a participative way. And as I mentioned at the beginning, our life is a story, it is a narrative. And I do believe one thing that I see that can often happen in the modern world is we can be kind of coerced into a very passive way of
That's true.
relating to life. And much of modern entertainment has a certain passive quality to it.
True.
But the root of entertainment is what we're going to be doing, live storytelling.
Hmm.
Just last week, I went, my sister's an actress, and just last week she was in a performance, it's just a small thing, in a
Right.
small auditorium with she and six other women. And it was mainly monologues and songs. And I overheard people in the audience saying, and I felt the same, what a privilege to just be so up close, to see it so
Mm.
personal, so raw, so unfiltered. And one time with my sister, this is going back some years now, we did a live, it was a theatrical performance of stories of Ganesha actually. And I remember one of the people working in the theatre as we were leaving saying, wow, this we should do more of this. This is really this is the roots of theatre.
Oh, yeah, right.
And it's participative.
Mm.
It's not that they're the performers and we're the audience. It's not, no.
Right.
We are all creating the story together. And so I find that yoga is an active practice. It's something that we have to engage with. And when we study in this way and apprentice ourselves to the stories, I do think it can help us come into a more empowered or more conscious relationship with the story of our own life, the stories that
Mm.
we are fed or exposed to, and hopefully then contribute in some way to shaping a better story.
I mean, I think that sound summarizes it so well. And it's a very beautiful picture, like you have now painted for the workshop series we are doing and hopefully continue to do on because as you say, it's so many layers. Uh, it's so powerful what it can do to each one of us who's just like open enough and interested to come and see. So I'm definitely hooked. I was before already, and I'm happy that it will happen in September and then also in October. So thank you so much, and thank you for sharing all of your stories as well in this conversation today. They were tools of understanding and describing how this all will develop and how it will look like in the fall. So thank you so much, James, for everything you taught us in this conversation.
Thank you, Nadine. And yeah, very much look forward to sharing in the beautiful Ikigai space in September and October, and then hopefully more to come after that. And so if people
Great.
want to join, the link is there in the description. Sign up now to guarantee your place. And
Definitely.
yeah,
Great. Thank you.
thank you, Nadine. Bye for now.
Bye.